The jet tore across the pale blue morning sky like a wounded bird, trailing a ribbon of black smoke behind it. People on the beach would later say it looked unreal, like a scene from a disaster movie, until the left engine exploded into a bloom of fire and the aircraft began to fall. It did not spiral gracefully. It dropped. It dropped toward the wide, sunlit stretch of Crescent Bay where a handful of early swimmers and fishermen were already scattered across the glittering water. And among them was a single father who had already lost more than most men could bear. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Home with Dad. Stories like this remind us that one act of courage can change everything. It was just after 8 in the morning when Rowan Hale saw the smoke. The day had begun like so many others in his quiet, strained life. He had woken before dawn in the small rented bungalow 2 blocks from the shore, careful not to wake his 6-year-old son, Milo. He had packed Milo's lunch with steady hands that still bore faint scars from years of mechanical work. Peanut butter sandwich, sliced apples, a small handwritten note tucked inside that said, "You are my brave boy." Rowan did that every day, because after losing Milo's mother to a sudden illness 2 years earlier, he had promised himself that his son would never doubt he was loved. Rowan worked nights repairing boats at the marina. The pay was modest, the hours long, but it allowed him to be present during the day. After dropping Milo at school that morning, Rowan had returned to the beach for a quick swim before heading home to sleep. Swimming was the only thing that quieted the noise in his head. The grief, the unpaid bills, the landlord's warnings, the quiet fear that he was not enough for his son. He was waist deep in the water when he heard the distant boom. He looked up, shielding his eyes from the rising sun. The jet was lower than it should have been, banking awkwardly. A second explosion echoed across the bay, and a shockwave rippled the surface of the water. People on shore began shouting. Rowan's first thought was of Milo, safe at school inland. His second was simple and instinctive. There were people on that plane. The jet struck the water with a violent crash that sent a towering wall of spray into the air. The impact was deafening. For a split second, everything seemed frozen in brightness and noise. Then the aircraft began to sink. Rowan did not think about danger. He did not think about fuel igniting or debris slicing through the water. He dove. The ocean was colder farther out. Pieces of the jet floated around him. Cushions, twisted metal, fragments of wing. Smoke hissed where it met the water. Rowan swam with powerful strokes, ignoring the burn in his lungs. He reached the broken fuselage just as it began to tilt. A section near the rear had split open, and through the jagged opening he saw movement. Inside, chaos reigned. Water rushed in. People were trapped in their seats, struggling with jammed belts. Rowan hauled himself through the opening, cutting his arm on torn metal. He moved from one passenger to the next, unfastening belts, pulling them toward the exit. A woman clung to his shoulders, coughing. He guided her out. A teenage boy followed. Time lost meaning. The aircraft groaned as it sank lower. Then he saw him. A man in a dark tailored suit, unconscious, pinned beneath a collapsed overhead compartment. Blood streaked across his temple. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, his silver hair plastered to his forehead. There was something strangely out of place about the crispness of his clothing amid the wreckage. Rowan tried lifting the metal debris, but it was heavier than it looked. Water surged around them, rising past Rowan's chest. Rowan thought of Milo's face that morning, the way he had grinned sleepily and asked if they could build a sandcastle after school. Rowan had promised yes. He could not die here. Not today. Not when his son needed him. With a roar of effort that tore from deep within him, Rowan braced his feet against the tilted cabin floor and shoved upward. The metal shifted. Just enough. He dragged the unconscious man free, slinging the man's arm over his shoulder. The aircraft lurched violently, tipping nose down. They had seconds. Rowan kicked hard, propelling them through the broken opening just as the fuselage slipped beneath the surface. The suction pulled at his legs, dragging him down. For a terrifying moment, he felt the ocean claim them both. Then he kicked again, harder, lungs screaming, and they burst into sunlight and air. Boats were approaching now, sirens wailing in the distance. Rowan kept the man's head above water, whispering desperate encouragement even though the man could not hear him. He swam until his arms felt like stone, until hands reached down from a rescue boat, and hauled them aboard. On deck, paramedics took over. Rowan collapsed on his back, staring up at the blazing morning sky. He could taste salt and blood. Around him, survivors sobbed, some calling out names that would never answer. The man in the suit was rushed toward the stern, where CPR began. Rowan rolled onto his side, coughing. He did not know who the man was. He did not care. He only knew he had done what any father would hope someone would do for his own child. The rest of the day blurred into statements and hospital corridors. Rowan refused treatment beyond basic stitches for his arm. He needed to pick up Milo from school. By late afternoon, exhausted beyond measure, he stood in the school parking lot with damp hair and a bandaged forearm. Milo ran into his arms, chattering about a spelling test and a drawing he had made. Rowan held him a little tighter than usual. He did not tell his son about the crash. He did not want to fill the boy's world with fear. That night, after Milo fell asleep, Rowan sat at the small kitchen table and watched the news on his old television. The headline flashed across the screen: Tech billionaire CEO survives private jet crash. The camera showed a photograph of the man Rowan had pulled from the wreckage. His name was Alistair Vance, founder and CEO of Vance Dynamics, a global technology empire worth billions. Analysts called him visionary. Critics called him ruthless. But tonight, reporters called him lucky to be alive. Rowan stared at the screen in stunned silence. He had saved a billionaire. He switched off the television. It changed nothing. Tomorrow he would still wake before dawn. He would still worry about rent. He would still count coins before grocery shopping. Saving a powerful man did not magically fix his leaking roof or the medical debt lingering from his wife's illness. The next morning arrived bright and clear, as if the ocean had not swallowed a jet the day before. Rowan was halfway through making pancakes for Milo when a low rumble echoed down their quiet street. He frowned and stepped onto the porch. 3 black Cadillacs rolled slowly toward his modest bungalow, their polished surfaces gleaming in the sunlight. Neighbors peeked through curtains. The vehicles stopped in front of his house in perfect formation. Rowan's first thought was that something had gone wrong. Perhaps he had done something wrong at the crash site. Perhaps he was being blamed. The doors opened in unison. Men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the surroundings with practiced precision. From the center car emerged a tall woman in an elegant navy suit, her expression composed but not unkind. She approached Rowan with measured steps. Milo stood behind his father, clutching the edge of his worn t-shirt. The woman introduced herself as Celeste Arden, Chief of Staff to Alistair Vance. She explained that Mr. Vance had regained consciousness late the previous night. His first question had not been about the company's stock price or the condition of the aircraft. It had been about the man who pulled him from the sea. Rowan felt heat creep up his neck. He shifted uncomfortably, aware of his faded jeans and flour-dusted hands. Celeste continued, her voice steady. Mr. Vance wished to express his gratitude personally. He had insisted on coming, but doctors advised against travel for a few days. Instead, he had sent her. She handed Rowan a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The script was uneven, likely written with trembling hands. Alistair Vance thanked Rowan not as a CEO, but as a grandfather. He wrote that when he had regained awareness in the hospital, the first image in his mind had been of Rowan's face above him in the flooding cabin, eyes fierce with determination. He wrote that he owed his life to a stranger who had expected nothing in return. Rowan swallowed hard. Celeste then gestured toward the Cadillacs. She explained that Mr. Vance had established an immediate trust fund for Milo's education. All medical debts from Rowan's wife's illness would be paid in full. Additionally, Vance Dynamics wished to offer Rowan a position overseeing marine safety innovation for the company's expanding environmental division. The salary was more than Rowan had earned in 5 years combined. The world seemed to tilt. Rowan felt pride, relief, disbelief, and something else he could not name. He looked down at Milo, whose eyes were wide with confusion and wonder. Rowan asked for time. He needed to think. He had always been wary of sudden fortune. Life had taught him that gifts often came with strings. Celeste nodded. She left a contact number and returned to the waiting vehicles. The Cadillacs drove away as quietly as they had arrived, leaving behind a stunned silence. In the days that followed, reporters swarmed the neighborhood. Rowan declined interviews. He did not want his son thrust into the glare of media attention. He spent long hours walking along the shore, thinking. He thought about pride. about independence, about the promise he had made to raise Milo with integrity. Accepting help felt, in some stubborn corner of his heart, like admitting he could not do it alone. But he also thought about the night he had sat at the kitchen table calculating whether to pay the electric bill or buy Milo new shoes. He thought about the way his son's face lit up when he talked about becoming an engineer someday. This was not charity. It was gratitude. It was an opportunity born from courage, not pity. Rowan called Celeste. Weeks later, he stood in a glass-walled office overlooking the same bay where the jet had crashed. He wore a tailored suit that still felt foreign on his shoulders. His role was not ceremonial. Vance Dynamics genuinely wanted his insight into real-world marine safety. Rowan's hands-on experience repairing boats, understanding currents, and surviving that crash gave him perspective engineers in boardrooms lacked. Alistair Vance visited the office for the first time since the accident on a bright afternoon. The older man walked slowly, aided by a cane, but his eyes were sharp. When he saw Rowan, emotion flickered across his face. They did not speak as CEO and employee. They stood as two men whose lives had intersected in the most violent way possible. Alistair placed a hand on Rowan's shoulder, gratitude heavy in the gesture. He spoke of second chances, of how success had once consumed him so completely that he had missed birthdays, anniversaries, quiet moments that never returned. Facing death in the sinking jet had stripped away illusion. It had reminded him that wealth meant nothing without time and people to share it with. Rowan listened. He saw not a titan of industry, but a man shaken awake. As months passed, change rippled outward. The trust fund ensured Milo would never worry about college tuition. The medical debt vanished like a storm cloud lifting. Rowan paid off the bungalow and began repairing it with care, turning it into a true home. But the greatest transformation was not financial. Rowan carried himself differently, not with arrogance, but with quiet assurance. He had faced death and chosen courage. He had saved a life without knowing the reward. That knowledge fortified him. He made it a point to volunteer at local schools, teaching water safety and resilience. He told children that bravery was not about being fearless, but about acting despite fear. Milo watched his father with shining eyes. 1 year after the crash, Crescent Bay held a memorial for those who had lost their lives. The sky was clear, the ocean calm. Families gathered, releasing white flowers into the water. Rowan stood with Milo at his side. Alistair Vance stood nearby, hat removed, head bowed. There was no media frenzy this time, only quiet remembrance. Rowan realized that the crash had not just saved one man. It had reshaped two families. It had softened a billionaire's heart and strengthened a single father's faith in himself. That evening, back at home, Rowan tucked Milo into bed. The boy asked if heroes were real. Rowan paused, then told his son that heroes are simply ordinary people who choose kindness when it would be easier to look away. Milo fell asleep with a small smile. Rowan stepped outside onto the porch. The same street that had once echoed with the arrival of 3 Cadillacs now lay peaceful under the fading daylight. He breathed in the salt air. He thought about how close he had come to never seeing another sunrise. About how life can pivot in a single heartbeat. About how courage given freely can return in ways no one expects. If this story has touched your heart even a little, take a moment to like, share, and let us know your thoughts. Your engagement keeps stories like this alive and spreading hope. Because somewhere, someone may be standing waist deep in their own storm, wondering if their quiet acts of goodness matter. Please comment below and tell us where you are watching from, and whether you believe one brave decision can change a lifetime. Rowan looked up at the stars emerging over Crescent Bay, feeling something he had not felt in years. Peace. Not because he had been rescued by wealth, but because he had proven to himself that even in the darkest, most terrifying moment, he could rise. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all.